Begin this hour with the growing and bipartisan concerns that the U.S. may have committed a war crime while fighting suspected drug traffickers. The September 2nd strike was the first in what's become a months-long military campaign. Yesterday, both the president and the defense secretary defended the operation during a high-level cabinet meeting, but they also claimed neither were aware or monitoring that situation during perhaps the most controversial moment of the attack. So let us begin with CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi. So we seem to learn more and more about this attack, Olivia, every day. And now it strikes me that the Secretary of Defense is constantly dropping the name of the admiral who carried out, or who was operationally in charge of those strikes. And it does feel as if it's sort of, on one hand, suggesting that he supports this admiral, and on the other hand, sort of throwing him out there.
Well, good morning, Vlad. It's good to see you again this morning. It's certainly notable. There's been a shifting timeline here about this story. First, it was fabricated and not true. Now the White House confirms there was indeed a second strike. And then yesterday, we heard from the president and Secretary Hegseth seated together in that cabinet meeting, where President Trump said, one, he didn't even know about the second strike, but two, also defending Hegseth, saying he did not know it was targeting people in the water. Secretary Hegseth then said that Admiral Bradley, who he says carried out the attack, has his full support as he goes through these next round of congressional inquiries about this entire saga on September 2nd that involves several strikes on alleged drug boats coming out of Venezuela. Secretary Hegseth also said he was not sure and did not see any survivors in the water after he witnessed the first strike on this Venezuelan boat due to, quote, the fog of war. But none of this seems to be satisfying the lawmakers on Capitol Hill. They plan to question Admiral Bradley tomorrow. That will be Republicans and Democrats on the Armed Services Committees in both chambers of Congress. And certainly notable that this will be happening because lawmakers have not given any indication to this White House that they are going to authorize action against Venezuela. So just the latest chapter in this ongoing timeline of what has gone on with these strikes regarding Venezuelan alleged drug boats.
Yeah. All right, Olivia, thank you very much. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. So, Charlie, the secretary, quote, cited the fog of war, that's the quote, when answering questions about this incident, saying that we, the members of the media, the press, we don't understand what that is. Explain what he means.
Well, first of all, I have to take issue with the fact he continued to say that, when he said the fog of war, when he gets criticized or gets asked difficult questions, he tends to lash out at the media. And he went on to say, you wouldn't understand that from your air-conditioned offices. Well, I, for one, have been covering conflicts for a lot longer than he was ever an active service member, and not from an air-conditioned office. And there are plenty of people in the press corps who have done the field work and know what it's like to try to get this information. The fog of war itself, yes, that's a real thing. But specifically when you're talking about those strikes and whether or not he saw a survivor, like, I'm not going to question him on what he saw. But in terms of when the strike took place and where it took place, all of that would have been recorded. We will have information of that. So the fog of war can sometimes be a useful tool. It's when you share that information. What you're seeing there with the unclassified part of it, and there'll be some areas that are fogged out, you're going to have a time code on there. You're going to have a location. You're going to have the number of strikes, when exactly they happened. Because what he was asked is whether he knew, first of all, there were survivors on board, and secondly, when the second strike or strikes happened on that particular craft. And he said he didn't know or didn't remember, or whatever that case was. But the fact that the information does exist, it should be irrefutable. The fact that he may not know about it or wants to share it, well, that's down to him.
Yeah, it should be very interesting, too, Charlie, as you know, when that admiral appears before some members of Congress to answer their questions. I hope we get a readout of that, or that the press is invited. And speaking of the relationship between this administration and the press, what do you know about these briefings that have been going on this week with the Pentagon's newly approved press corps? In other words, the press corps that they approve because they like the way that they report on the activities of the Pentagon.
Right. Well, yesterday's briefing that took place with the Pentagon spokesperson, Kingsley, sort of lashed out at legacy media, the media that was there, of which there are probably 70 or 80 individuals. We're talking about us, CNN, ABC, New York Times, pretty much across the board, and some of the military trade publications and magazines, too. So it's not just what they would term legacy media, but some of the specialist media that have been covering that, in some cases, for decades. So now we have applied to go to those briefings using a form that the Pentagon has asked us, the DOD has asked us to fill out, specifically stating when we want to go, what we want to cover, et cetera. So we learned that 2 briefings were going to take place. One of them was on camera yesterday, another one today with Defense Secretary Hegseth. That will be a gaggle, so off camera but on record gaggle. Once again, we have been denied access to that as well. So we're going to have to follow our colleagues inside the building to be able to report on what was said.
All right, Charlie. And Charlie, just for my own personal knowledge, the Pentagon's press person, Kingsley, had she done any in-person briefings on camera up until this moment?
No.
So this was her first in front of a friendly, essentially, press corps.
Handpicked, yes.
Handpicked. All right, Charlie D'Agata reporting from our bureau in Washington, where he continues to do the work. Charlie, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns to talk more about this. So, Caitlin, the admiral at the center of all of this, as we just discussed with Charlie, is set to give a briefing to Congress tomorrow about these strikes. What's expected?
Well, Vlad, he's the person that everybody up here on Capitol Hill wants to hear from because of the way the administration is essentially pointing the fingers at him at this point. Now, both sides of the aisle have been calling for more information, more answers to the many questions that they have. This is both Republicans and Democrats. We talked to a lot of lawmakers yesterday, and I want to play a couple of pieces of sound of what we heard from them.
I think there's a broad consensus that it's illegal to kill people who are clinging to wreckage.
And let me be very clear, killing shipwreck survivors is a war crime. Instead of accepting responsibility for what happened, Hegseth chose to throw Admiral Bradley under the bus. Shame on Pete Hegseth.
Now, Vlad, I want to underscore something that Rand Paul told us yesterday. You just heard from him in that clip there, the Republican. You know that Rand Paul has been kind of an anomaly in Republican Party politics by talking about what he sees as the illegality of these strikes in the first place. And what he said is that he said either Hegseth, the defense secretary, is lying or doesn't know what's going on and is incompetent. So either way, in his view, there are some real consequences here that need to be made. Now, the other thing to consider is that Congress has essentially removed itself from getting involved in oversight here for several years now, predating Trump. And that's why you've had a small group of lawmakers, including Rand Paul, want to reassert Congress's authority with something like the War Powers Act. That, remains to be seen whether that would gain any traction here. But bottom line, this briefing tomorrow is just going to be huge because lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, want to hear exactly what happened. They want a timeline. They also want to know what Hegseth's, what his version of the story is, can be corroborated. And also, this will be the first time that they are getting this kind of information. They want to see the video, they want to see the audio, and most of them will move on from there. There are 2 camps of Republicans, I will say, those rushing to the administration's defense, and others who do have serious questions about this and more broadly about the approach.
Yeah, we'll be watching tomorrow. Caitlin Huey-Burns for us on the Hill. Caitlin, thank you.